preaching to you tonight. Judges chapter 9, verse number 22 is where we're going to begin reading. And as you find your place, if you don't mind standing in honor of reading God's Word, Judges chapter 9, verse number 22. 2 weeks ago, we started this kind of two-part series on a man named Abimelech. Abimelech was the son of Jerubbaal, also known as Gideon, by way of a concubine that he had in the city of Shechem. And we talked about how Abimelech, his name means my dad is king. Abimelech had gone and killed his 70 brothers. The men of Shechem had set him up as king of Israel, but really was like king of the city. So, you know, it's not like that big a deal. But anyways, he was a little city state king, and he was a very violent man. He was not a godly man. He took power through manipulation and corrupt leadership tactics. If you remember, he said, he used identity politics. He said, I'm like you. You should vote for me because we're the same. He leveraged his familial connections through his mom, had his family members going around town saying, that Abimelech guy, he's a pretty good guy. You should really let Abimelech be king. So that was going on. And so just a lot of things happening to where, he's just not a good guy. Does anybody else smell something? Okay, Jerry, where's Jerry? There's like a weird smell coming from up here. Can you come up here and just check it out? Oh yeah, you can't smell. Somebody who can smell. It's like a gas kind of smell. Yeah. Air conditioning? Yeah. He'll figure it out. He doesn't smell, but he's good at finding those things. Yeah, I think it's that. You smell it? Okay. You know it's got to be strong. That's the baptistry drain over there. Wow, this is really getting off the rails. He's going to pour some water and bleach down that, and we should be good. Okay. Abimelech, yeah. He killed his brothers. That's right. You guys were listening. That's great. Okay, let's just start reading in verse number 22. All right, the Bible says, when Abimelech had reigned 3 years over Israel, then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech, their brother, which slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, which aided him in the killing of his brethren. And the men of Shechem set liers in wait for him in the top of the mountains, and they robbed all that came along the way by them, and it was told Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brethren and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. And they went out into the fields and gathered their vineyards and trode the grapes and made merry and went into the house of their God and did eat and drink and cursed Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech? And who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is not he the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for why should we serve him? And would to God this people were under my hand, then would I remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, increase thine army and come out. And when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. And he sent messengers unto Abimelech privily, saying, behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brethren be come to Shechem, and behold, they fortify the city against thee. Now therefore, up by night, thou and the people that is with thee, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, that in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, thou shalt rise early, and set upon the city. And behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against thee, then thou mayest do to them as thou shalt find occasion. Abimelech rose up, and all the people that were with him by night, and they laid wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entering of the gate of the city. And Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him, from lying in wait. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Behold, there come people down from the top of the mountains." And Zebul said unto him, "Thou seest the shadow of the mountains as if they were men." And Gaal spake again and said, "See, there come people down by the middle of the land, and another company along by the plain of Meonim." Then said Zebul unto him, "Where is now thy mouth, wherewith thou sayest, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Is not this the people that thou hast despised? Go out, I pray now, and fight with them." And Gaal went out before the men of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. And many were overthrown and wounded, even unto the entering of the gate. And Abimelech dwelt at Arumah, and Zebul thrust out Gaal and his brethren, that they should not dwell in Shechem. And it came to pass on the morrow, that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. And he took the people and divided them into 3 companies, and laid wait in the field, and looked, and behold, the people were come forth out of the city, and he rose up against them and smote them. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and the 2 other companies ran upon all the people that were in the fields and slew them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city and slew the people that was therein, and beat down the city and sowed it with salt. And when all the men of the tower of Shechem heard that they entered into a hold of the house of the god Berith, remember we talked about him, Baal Berith, and it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech got him up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people that were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bow from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. And he said unto all the people that were with him, "What ye have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." And all the people likewise cut down every man his bow, and followed Abimelech, and put them to the hold, and set the hold on fire upon them, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also, about 1,000 men and women. Then went Abimelech to Thebez, and encamped against Thebez, and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and thither fled all the men and women and all they of the city, and shut it to them, and gat them up to the top of the tower. Sounds familiar. And Abimelech came unto the tower and fought against it, and went hard unto the door of the tower to, guess what, burn it with fire. And a certain woman cast a piece of a millstone upon Abimelech's head and all, to break his skull. This woman was not messing around. Then he called hastily unto the young man, his armor-bearer, and said unto him, "Draw thy sword and slay me, that men say not of me, a woman slew him." And his young man thrust him through, and he died. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man unto his place. Thus God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, which he did unto his father, in slaying his 70 brethren, and all the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Thank you so much for standing. You may be seated. And get our slides up here in just a second. This is definitely the house that treachery built, this house of Abimelech. Have you ever seen a situation where someone got exactly what they deserved, just maybe not in the way you expected? Have you ever seen that? Our society likes to say, well, that's karma. The Bible says it's the law of sowing and reaping. You reap what you sow. And some of you have been farmers or gardeners, you realize that there's a truth embedded into the law of sowing and reaping, is that you plant one seed and you produce a plant that bears many seeds. And so you usually reap more than you sow. We see it in our society from time to time. Perhaps it's a corrupt CEO whose company collapses under the weight of his own fraud. We see that. Perhaps it was a political figure who rose to power by betraying everyone that was close to him, but then it all came undone by the same tactics he used to rise. I don't know about you, but I appreciate a story that has some poetic justice to it, don't you? It's just kind of satisfying. We are made to long for justice. We want to see it unfold. We want to think that those who are wrongdoers and those who are sinners are going to receive a payment for their sins. I think the Bible talks about it and puts it this way: the wages of sin is what? Death. Let's be honest. We don't just see it on the news. The need for justice, or even the presence of injustice, is something that we feel in our day-to-day lives, don't we? I mean, even just on the road, somebody sees the merge sign for miles and miles, but they zoom up and merge right at the last moment and cut everybody off. Doesn't that just irk your justice meter? Sometimes it's not so impersonal, though. Sometimes it's a friend who betrays you. A friend that becomes an enemy. That hurts, doesn't it? Sometimes it's a choice that's made in selfishness that comes back to bite us. Or, men, don't admit to this one, but I know probably all of us have been there. It's a shortcut that leads to a dead end. I tried to take a shortcut one time in D.C., you got the beltway that goes around D.C., and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to cut straight through. The bad news is 95 doesn't cut straight through. You get stuck down in a bad part of D.C., and at the time, all we had was a Garmin. You remember the Garmins that sat on your dash? Yeah, we almost didn't make it out of there alive. Shortcut that leads to a dead end. These moments remind us of something that is really deep in our souls and something that is really an eternal fact, and that is that God is just. He's a just being. He is fair. He is honest. He doesn't let things go undealt with. I say this from time to time. I think it's a good, it's helpful for me. It may not be for you, perhaps, but God is the perfect scorekeeper. It doesn't matter what good you do that you think went unnoticed. It didn't go unnoticed. God saw it. But the flip is true too. It doesn't matter what evil you take part in that you think no one else knows or saw. God saw. Now here's the problem for us. God is not only just, God is what? Long-suffering. And so sometimes it seems like God's justice is absent. Like in the situation where one man goes and kills his 70 brothers. I've only got 3 brothers. I don't think I could take them all at once. I'm really kind of confused how this happened. For 70, did they just line up and, say, okay, I don't know. But here's the thing. God may be silent for a time. That doesn't mean he's not just. And when we trade righteousness for power or an ill-gotten advantage, justice will always come knocking. Oh, Pastor, I don't like this very much. I want God to be merciful and gracious to me. Yes, we do. But think about the evil you see in this world. Don't you want God to be just? Don't you? When a 31-year-old gets killed on national TV, don't you want justice to be enacted? Huh? When a child is abused and we find out about it years later, don't you want justice to be served on their abuser? Well, God's no respecter of persons. If he's going to be just, he's going to be just across the board. That's what we see in this story here. Abimelech and Shechem had put together this unrighteous, ungodly partnership built on ambition and violence. And in our passage tonight, God is going to enact justice against them. He's going to tear down what they think they've built brick by brick. If you go back to verse number 22 and look at the beginning of this again, how long had Abimelech been reigning in Israel? 3 years. That's enough time for us to start to wonder, is God really going to do something about this? Does God really wink at this kind of behavior? He kills his brothers. They set up an ungodly religious system and an ungodly king, and God just says, it's not that big a deal. God doesn't act that way. As we walk through this story and we look at their downfall, I want you to consider this question. Because it's not just let's look at them, let's look inward too. But as we see how God deals with them, ask yourself this: am I building something in my life that God can bless, or something that he must break? Am I acting in a way that God can bless me, or am I acting in a way to which God's justice is triggered against me? Now I want you to look in verses 22 through 25 again, where we see that God initiates judgment through division. Division is a curse. Disunity is a curse. It is. It slows down the progress of the gospel. It messes with God's plan. It hurts the mission and the reputation of our God. But God will use division when men are acting unrighteously. And so we see that in verse number 23, where it says that God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. These are bosom buddies. This is the coalition. This is his voting bloc that is now turning against him and really betraying him and stabbing him in the back. You and I understand that unity and peace are not guaranteed. Wouldn't it be great when you made your vows to your wife and you said, I promise to love you forever and to take care of you and obey you and do all these things for better or for worse? Wouldn't it be great if that meant like total peace for the rest of your life? It would be great. That doesn't work that way. Peace and unity are not guaranteed. It's something that we must seek God's help to maintain. And it's something that can be broken by one or both parties, right? It's true. What do people say? It takes two to tango? Not always the case. We cannot expect God to grant this prayer for peace if we are living outside of his will for us. And Abimelech had shown great disdain for God and his law. And so God takes away the peace that all men should seek. And the reason for this is really plainly, explicitly stated in verse number 23. He says that God sent an evil spirit and they dealt treacherously with each other. Verse number 24. Why? That the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come back on them and their blood be laid upon Abimelech and the men of Shechem. Now, if you go down to verse number 56 and 7, I'm afraid I might not get to this, but you'll notice it says that God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, and then in verse 57 it says, and all the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads. Verse 56 and 7 connect to verse number 24 as kind of the bookends of what we see here. God is rendering, or we might say repaying them for the evil that they did. The violence and the manipulation and the dishonesty that they engaged with is going to come back upon them. And so the purpose is to repay the violence that they had shown. Obviously, Abimelech had slain his brothers. The men of Shechem had helped him do just that. So on one hand, you have the absence of familial family love. On the other hand, you have this group of people that just went right along with the slaughter of 70 men. No one would just stand by and watch or even celebrate as 70 are killed. Do you live in this world? Man, if I disagree with your position or your identity, then that gives me the right to celebrate your death, wish for your death. This is totally the way the world works. Well, with the absence of peace, Shechem starts to betray Abimelech. And if you look at verse number 25, we see that Shechem, the city, starts to support these raiders that stir up disloyalty to Abimelech. They hire these thieves, robbers to wait along the roads, and they're probably hoping that Abimelech will come by and they can jump him and attack him and maybe kill him. But while they're waiting for Abimelech, they're just robbing anyone that happens to come by. And so they're hoping to either get a crack at Abimelech himself, or at the very least catch his attention and draw him out of hiding. But you see, okay, hold on. There's something we have to understand. Neither Abimelech, and hopefully I've made this clear already, neither Abimelech nor the Shechemites are heroes in this story. No matter how it seems like things are going, don't ever think, oh, I hope Abimelech wins. Because Abimelech's a dirtbag. And don't think that, oh, well, the poor Shechemites. No, the Shechemites are rotten to the core. And so what they're demonstrating for us really is the depravity of man when he turns from God. And the people here had turned from God, and they had turned to Baal-berith, who is the God, the Lord of the covenant. There's only one Lord of the covenant, and that's Yahweh, not Baal-berith. And so they've adopted this counterfeit religion, and this is the result of turning from the Lord, is this kind of depravity. And so you know, because you've been to church, that our God will not allow such rebellion against him to succeed or prosper. And so while this is going on, God institutes the judgment that he has planned for these two groups. Now, it had been 3 years, but that doesn't mean that God was not going to judge them. So we have seen this play out differently throughout the book of Judges, where the people sin and God deals with them. Usually God sends a foreign enemy in to attack them, like the Midianites, the Amalekites. We've seen these folks, the Philistines. God doesn't have to do that with this group. All he has to do is leave them to themselves, and they will enact their own judgment upon themselves. With God beginning to sow discord between these former allies, he has set the stage for their destruction. My grandmother used to live down in New Orleans, and I loved going to see her. We call her Mama, and Mama had this great big giant, at least it seemed big and giant to us, brick chimney. And we used to play wall ball, throw the racquetball off of it and just our tennis rackets and hit it. We thought we were cool. But it's New Orleans. It's like a city underwater. And so almost inevitably, you're going to get termites in your house. And I remember when that chimney got infested with termites, and she had to have a lot of that side of the house completely redone. You know, because you're aware of all of this kind of stuff, but a house that has termites can look really good from the outside. It can look strong, can look safe, comfortable, it can look expensive. But if that termite issue isn't dealt with, what eventually happens to the house? It collapses. Abimelech has built a kingdom, a house full of termites. And he's not going to deal with it, and we're going to see it as it caves in. Because when God brings judgment, he often begins by pulling the support beams out from underneath us. But go down to verse number 26 now, down to verse 41. I want you to see this guy, Gaal. Gaal comes along and challenges Abimelech, and really results in the collapse of Shechem's loyalty to Abimelech. And this guy becomes kind of a mouthpiece for rebellion. He emboldens the people. He stirs up discontent. And there's always somebody, anytime there's a crack in the foundation, someone is there to come along and stir the pot. How many of you just really don't care for drama? Raise your hand. Be honest. All right, now who cares? Who likes drama? One? Okay, a teenager. Gaal must have liked it. And I guess a man named Gaal probably has his own issues, but I think that used to be a man's name, actually. But he's not a good man either. He's an opportunist. And he senses this disgruntled atmosphere in amongst the Shechemites, and so he goes to take advantage of the situation, and he convinces the men of Shechem to trust him. I'm not going to take the time to deal with every verse. This is a pretty long passage, but you can look at it, and what's happening here is pretty clear. He basically says, Abimelech's a bum. Wouldn't it be great if there was somebody who'd deal with this guy Abimelech? Oh, wait, how about me? And the men of Shechem say, yes, hail Gaal. That wasn't in my notes, but it was pretty clever. They throw their support behind this guy, and there's a story in here of how they bring in the harvest, they trode the grapes, they have this big party, and they worship their false god. Not a good combo. And it's in this scene that is characterized by human confidence, where we see them and their rejection of God, and this scene concludes with Gaal getting up and, being surrounded by his supporters, boldly calling Abimelech out to challenge him. It's like when one rapper has a beef with another rapper, and so they drop, a diss track, and then it's up to the other rapper to respond. Otherwise, he's a coward, and he, probably should just move out of the country. Well, that's what Gaal does. He says, "Oh, come on, Abimelech, come on at me. Give me your best shot. I can handle it. Come on." And there's a guy there, and I think Gael knows what he's doing, but there's a guy there named Zebul, and Zebul is the officer of the city, and he's loyal to Abimelech. So he takes this claim that Gael is making, and he delivers it to Abimelech, and he says, look, they're fortifying the city. They're putting up together an army. They're going to try and overthrow you. So they come up with a plan for Abimelech to attack the city. Abimelech's going to come and attack Shechem, his hometown, the people that he said, hey, vote for me, I'm just like you. He's going to attack them and overthrow them because they're showing some cracks in their loyalty to him. And so Zebul tells Abimelech to move his army in at night, and that way they'll be able to take Gael and the men of Shechem by surprise. And let's see, if you look at verse number 35, Gael comes out of the city after Abimelech has hidden in the fields that night. And as Abimelech gets up and his men start moving towards the city, Gael sees the people and he says to Zebul, who he probably doesn't realize at the point is a turncoat, and he says to Zebul, hey, behold, hey, look at that. There's some people coming down from the top of the mountains. Zebul said unto him, oh, Gael, you're seeing the shadow of the mountains and thinking it's a bunch of men. That's kind of humorous, if you ask me, that this works. I don't know, maybe Gael's still got some sleepy in his eyes, you know, those crusties that form, and he's not seeing very clearly, he's not focusing really good. But Zebul convinces him that this is just, you know, an illusion. In verse 37, Gael speaks to him again. He says, no. There are people coming down. I see them right there in the middle of the land. And another company's over here coming along the plain of Onim. And Zebul says, oh, well, Mr. Big Mouth, where's all those big fancy words you were using the other night during the party? This is Abimelech. Why don't you go show him what your army's made of? So he does. He goes off. Goes off to fight and engages with Abimelech and just loses in humiliating fashion. Kind of like a certain team from down south with a star on their head that took on a team called the Bears. But, anyways. Gael loses. And the leaders of Shechem that had come in and supplanted Abimelech, they lose all credibility. The people are then left vulnerable because the Bible tells us that Gael is cast out of the city. Zebul tells him he's not welcome to come back in. And so Shechem and their rebellion against Abimelech, who's a corrupt king in the first place, their rebellion starts to unravel. The house full of termites is starting to collapse, one beam after another. You know, we see this in real life history. You think about the end of World War II when Adolf Hitler and all of his loyal generals all start turning on each other. You know, and there's multiple instances of them trying to either silence a rival or set themselves up as Hitler's heir, and all these different things are going on. These people who acted like they were all on the same team, all of a sudden when things start falling apart, they start to show their true colors. Because when pride and ambition clash, someone always gets hurt. And when both sides are corrupt, we can see here that God is judging not only the men of Shechem, but also Abimelech. And so Shechem, in verses 42 to 49, is crushed, destroyed by the one that they empowered, the one that they crowned king. After Gael is defeated, Abimelech turns on Shechem itself. There's a really cool military story here about how he splits his group into three forces. I wonder where the son of Gideon got the idea to split his forces into three different groups. Because that's what Gideon did, you know, when he took on the Midianites. Okay, I didn't know if we were on the same page or not. But Abimelech takes his group and he goes and stands in the gate while the other two go through the fields and just wipe everybody out. Well, there's another group of people that Abimelech hasn't accounted for. It says in verse number 46, when all the men of the tower of Shechem heard that, they entered into a hold of the house of the god Berith, probably the place where the party took place just a few nights earlier. They go in there to try and seek refuge, and I don't know, maybe they think that Abimelech's going to have enough respect for their false god that he won't go and destroy the false god's temple. They obviously don't know Abimelech, because what does Abimelech do? Verse 48, he goes up to the mountain that's right outside the city. There are several mountains right outside of the city, and there's trees all over. Hold on a second. I thought it was the same mountain. It's not the same mountain as Jotham stood on. That would have been cool, but it's not. Anyways, they go up to the mountain. They start chopping down branches of the trees. And he tells all of his men to get branches, and they go down, and what do? They pile them up all along the tower, and they set fire to the tower. And 1,000 people are killed in the fire. I mean, he's a violent man. And you know, it's all happening in fulfillment of the prophecy that Jotham had said, don't put your trust in the bramble, because fire will come out of the bramble and consume the great trees of the forest. And here we see literal fire coming from Abimelech, who is the bramble, and it's consuming the city of Abimelech, or of Shechem. And so self-destruction continues here among Shechem as the king that they had chosen becomes their executioner. And God's justice often works through our own wicked choices. When I taught the teenagers, I used to tell them all the time, I've told you this too, God doesn't really need to send a plague on you when you sin. Your sin has its own consequences. And if you live a life of violence and manipulation and injustice and unrighteousness, just the consequences of those actions will be enough to judge you. And that's really what we see here in this passage. They're turning on themselves. They're suffering the consequences of their own sin. It's kind of like Haman. Remember Haman in the book of Esther? Haman's like, I hate this Mordecai guy. He won't bow down to me, and so I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill all of his people. And so he builds a gallows meant to kill Mordecai. Who ends up hanging from those gallows? Haman. He's a victim of his own scheming. And this is what happens when we choose convenience over character. The fire that we start will often come back to consume us. The last section of this passage is verse 50 to verse 54. Abimelech tries to repeat his tactics at the city of Thebes, but it doesn't go well. It's not really definitively stated why Abimelech goes to Thebes. Perhaps this is where Gael ran to. Perhaps this is where some of the troublemakers came from. Perhaps they just didn't go along with his plan to be king. And so now he's, kind of in a rage. And so he's going to go and he's going to take it out on Thebes. And he's almost successful in overthrowing that city too. The people of Thebes, they go and take refuge in their own tower. And Abimelech thinks, well, I did it once, I'll do it again. He attempts to set another fire. And while he's trying to set fire to the gate, there is a woman inside the tower who takes a piece of a millstone and throws it out the window of the tower. Now, this wasn't a shot in the dark. The Bible tells us pretty clearly that she was aiming for Abimelech. So, nice shot. She hits him in the head. I don't know who this lady was. Maybe she'll be in heaven and we can meet her. But what does it say? It was kind of graphic. Verse 53. A certain woman cast a piece of a millstone upon Abimelech's head and all, or with the intent of breaking his skull. Don't mess with the women of Thebes. Well, she hits him, but he doesn't die immediately. Now there's this horrible, horrible embarrassment if a man is killed by a woman back in their time. And so Abimelech's like, look, I don't want to be remembered as the guy that got killed by the woman who threw a rock at me. So he calls his armor bearer over. He says, please run me through so that I can die by your hand and not her hand. He does it. But here we are in 2025, and what are we talking about? The softball pitcher from Thebes who threw a rock and killed Abimelech. You see, we saw the men of Shechem judged for their wickedness. In verses 50 to 54, though, we see Abimelech who also faces judgment. He doesn't die in glory. He doesn't die in some, valorous battle. No. He's laying on the ground begging his armor bearer to kill him. It's a shameful death. It's an ironic death. I could never be a criminal. You ever watch these crime shows or listen to a real-life crime podcast? I couldn't do it. Because inevitably, these guys always get caught. And it's always like this one little bit of information, that they didn't cover their tracks here. And that's how they got them. It's incredible. Tiny little overlooked detail leads to their arrest. And for law-abiding citizens such as ourselves, we say, justice. Here's a passage where it didn't look like, for 3 years it seemed like they had gotten away with it. And yet at the end of the story, we can look at this and say, justice. Justice for the 70 brothers who were murdered. Justice for the wickedness and the manipulation that the men of Shechem supported. In verses, we already looked at it, but God makes a very clear moral lesson for us here. The narrator, Samuel, or whoever it is that's writing this, concludes by explicitly stating that God did all of this to render to them, to repay them for their evil. The ending here ties the story together and reveals the theological purpose that you and I are supposed to see here. It is that God is just, and he actively repays evil. Are you bothered by the evil that's in our world? Because I am. Sometimes it seems like there's no answer, but there is. Our God is just. He's not sleeping. He's not on vacation. He is actively going to enforce justice upon this world. And when people choose power over righteousness, God's justice will eventually bring them down. So let me give you just a couple of applications here tonight, because you're not a king. I guess in Christ we're all kings and queens, right? But you're not like the king of Collinsville or anything like that. But as an individual, how can you apply these things to your life? The first thing I think we need to do is we need to check our motives. Power and authority are not inherently evil. All of us have some bit of power or authority over someone. And so when we have power or authority, we should be careful that we do not use that power to control or manipulate others. Because when we do, then we act like Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and I think it's reasonable for us to say we should expect justice to be served if that's our motive. Are you striving for something maybe in your career or in your personal life at the expense of others or at the expense of your own integrity? Do you find yourself justifying harmful behavior in the name of results? Check your motives. I think another thing that we need to do as individuals is we need to take sin seriously. Haven't you sinned before and the consequences were not immediate? We just said earlier, the wages of sin is death. I think all of the survivors would be a lot more careful about sin if, like, we saw someone sin and they immediately died. Like, justice was immediately carried out in their life. I think we'd all be like, I'm not doing that. Of course, we'd probably get 30 steps down the road and we'd sin ourselves and we'd be a lesson for someone else. God is not passive towards sin, even if it seems like he is silent. We need to have a holy fear that will lead us to humility and respect for our just and holy God. We talk about 1 John 1:9, where we're told that if we will confess and forsake our sin, then we can find what? Forgiveness. We need to confess and forsake any area where we have been playing God in our life. And then thirdly, as individuals, I think we need to trust God's justice, even when things seem unchecked. Trust that God has things under control. There's a lot of different areas of sin that bother us. Usually it's the area of sin that we don't particularly deal with, But we see other people's sin and it bothers us. And we think, God, aren't you going to do something about that? Yes. He's a just God. And he will right wrongs in his way, not ours. And he will right wrongs in his timeline, not ours. We must have patience in waiting for justice. I think about Alexander the coppersmith. He was in the end of Paul's life, and Paul said, Alexander has done me much harm. He's He's opposed the ministry. He's tried to trip me up. He's tried to take every advantage that he can to smear my name in the mud. He's done me much evil. And then what does he say? The Lord reward him according to his works. Paul wasn't out for vengeance. He left it up to God. Why? Because God's the perfect scorekeeper. Whatever it is the situation that you're tempted to take matters into your own hands, give it to God. Tell God, Lord, I trust you to handle whatever it is. That's a hard thing to do. I'd like to play my own little violin, but I think the reality is we all deal with this, right? Give it to God. God, I trust you. I don't like the way that person treated me. This is wrong. I feel abused in this situation. I'd really like to get back at them. That's the easy, fleshly, human thing to think. The hard thing is to say, Lord, I trust you to handle this. I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff here and get to the conclusion. Abimelech died the way that he lived. And even at the end of his life, what do we see him do? He's trying to control his story. He didn't want to be remembered as the man who was killed by a woman. That's why he begged his servant to kill him. But it was too late. His legacy had crumbled, just like the tower that he had burned. The man who had killed his 70 brothers on one stone, remember that? It was a part of the story there, was brought down by one stone that was thrown at his head. God's justice is sure. God's justice is at times poetic. Before we leave this story shaking our heads, we need to pause. Because the truth is we've all made compromises. We've all tried to grab control, and we've all betrayed someone in some way, maybe even God himself. But as we look at this wicked king, we would be remiss in not reminding ourselves that there is another king, a better king, who stood in the way of God's justice and took God's justice for us. I mean, I've told you, God's going to carry out justice for our sins. Your sins will be judged. The good news is you don't have to be the one that pays it, because Jesus already did. Jesus didn't crush others in order to rise. Instead, he was crushed for us. He didn't take a throne by spilling others' blood. He took up the cross and spilled his own blood so that we could receive mercy. He offers forgiveness to anyone who is willing to step down from their own self-made throne and trust him for forgiveness. The question we all have to answer today is, will I keep trusting power my way, or will I humble myself under the rule of the righteous king, which is Jesus? When you bow to Jesus, you find mercy instead of destruction. If you haven't received that, you can receive that tonight. Am I building something that God can bless, or something that he must break? Let's pray. Dear